the head choppers, throat cutters, heart eaters of the so-called Syrian opposition, although very few of them appear to be Syrian, are on the march again and on the front pages, leading the news bulletins. But this time, the West is right behind them. This should come as no surprise. It has long been a certainty for me that the so-called ISIS and Al-Qaeda phenomenon is at the very least closely coordinated with Western and indeed Israeli interests. They are the people who have supplied the knives that are cutting the throats of the people in Aleppo and its surrounding countryside. They sharpened them. They are the people who provided the American armored personnel carriers, the Toyota pickup trucks that conquered Mosul in the past and are in possession now of the sacred and ancient city of Aleppo. And already they are behaving according to type. The first thing that went, well, the Christmas trees and the Christmas lights, then the alcohol in Aleppo airport, and now that ominous, sinister rounding up of every man who isn't with them, and the designation of them as heretics, as people who are subhuman. And one can only pray that they are not right now suffering the same fate that so many, including many Westerners, suffered in the last uprising of the ISIS-Al-Qaeda phenomenon. The Western media know who these people are. More importantly, they know what these people are. And that if they were to be able, God forbid, to raise their black flag over the ancient city and civilization of Damascus, on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea, the European lake, that it would be disastrous for everybody concerned, except Israel. These people who are ready to fight and die, to kill Muslims in Syria, to overthrow an Arab government, haven't so much as broken a window in an Israeli consulate anywhere in the world. These people are openly praising the Israeli government for its attacks on the resistance in Lebanon and its bombardment of targets inside Syria almost on a daily basis. They openly thank Netanyahu. So I've got a question for those who think it's oh so complicated, who think that although we were against the American British invasion and occupation of Iraq, we should somehow, by some twist of logic, be in favor of an American and British-inspired conspiracy to occupy Syria, to overthrow the government of the Syrian Arab Republic. This is my question. Why do you think the Anglo-American empire is invading Syria right now? Is it for the interests of the Syrian people? Is it for the interests of the Arabs? Is it for the interests of the Muslims, of whichever confession or sect? Or is it to use an insurgency to weaken the resistance to Israeli crimes? You don't need to be Einstein to work out the answer to that question. It's there right in front of you. If you'll only open your eyes, wipe your eyes of sectarian foolishness, you will see that that is exactly the intention. And it's not a secret. When Israel set up field hospitals in 2014 on the occupied Golan Heights to treat the wounded of the so-called Syrian opposition, it was obvious then that these forces are in lockstep. Now, I know the Syrian people very well. though not the government. I've met the president of Syria, but I don't know the names of any other official in the Syrian government. They've never given a thin dime to me, not even a baklawa. In fact, they still owe me an airline ticket for a conference I attended at their invitation in Damascus. So I'm not here asking you to support the Syrian government. I'm asking you to support the idea of the Syrian Arab Republic, where all ethnicities, all sects, all religions can coexist peacefully together, where nobody is hunted down and decapitated as a heretic because they don't share the tiny, narrow world and theological view of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. After all, if you ask anybody in the world what they think of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they'll almost all give you a very negative answer. So why then are their governments doing everything that they can to bring such people to power in Syria? Well, I was once trapped in a lift with William Hague, the then Foreign Secretary of Great Britain. Trapped in a lift, just me and him. And I asked him, when you were in Jordan, as he was just the other day, pledging your support to the so-called Syrian opposition, did it occur to you that these madmen won't stop at Damascus, that these madmen might end up even here in the British Parliament in our own building? Lucky for him, the doors opened and he was able to make his escape. But he had no answer to the questions that I was asking him. And lo and behold, these people did indeed breach the security of the British Parliament and tried to get inside to hunt for people like William Hague and people like me. A brave policeman gave his life trying to defend us. I want to ask the Western audience, and I want to ask the Islamic audience around the world. You may not like the government of Syria. There are plenty of governments in the Muslim world that I don't like, but I would stand with them if the United States and the United Kingdom invaded them and tried to overthrow their governments, the better to enslave their people. That's the attitude that you also should take. And then there's the Lebanon. Remember, there was a ceasefire in the Lebanon, which Israel has now broken 62 times since the ceasefire was declared. And until today, when 2 rockets in retaliation were fired at the Sheba Farms area of Lebanon, which is illegally occupied by Israel, not one shot was fired in return. So you've got to ask yourself what kind of ceasefire agreement this is. You've got to ask the so-called monitoring committee that said they would oversee the ceasefire that was agreed a couple of weeks ago, and ask them what they are doing to tame the beast that is Netanyahu and his apartheid state. How long can that ceasefire last? How long can a wider war in the Middle East be avoided? And what will be the consequences for us, for you, if one should break out? You've come to the right place to discuss it. Have it out with Galloway. Kevork Almassian is an award-winning journalist and political analyst specializing in Middle Eastern and Mediterranean affairs. He is the host of Syriana Analysis, an independent political commentary channel. Kevork is of Armenian origin from the historic city of Aleppo in Syria. Kevork, welcome to the show. First of all, my condolences as a citizen of Aleppo. It must be very, very hard to see these head choppers back in the streets of your city? Tell us.
Indeed, George. And one wonders how many times can we restore our city, and how many times shall we liberate our city, reconstruct our lives, our homes, our businesses. It is tiring to live half of your life basically in such a war and devastation, and trying to take care of your family, of your beloved ones in the country, and then everything turns upside down again. Now, what is happening in Aleppo, in my opinion, is not shocking for me. It was anticipated. I was detecting the movement of the militants since late September, and I have reported about it multiple times, and I knew that there is going to be a big attack on Aleppo, especially after a ceasefire agreement is reached in Lebanon. People usually cannot really make these connections between what's happening in Lebanon with Gaza and then with Syria. But you're one of the very few people who get it right on Syria and get it right in Palestine. This is very rare to see an intellectual or journalist who understand the geopolitical landscape in the region from this lens, because usually people are watching what's happening in Palestine and think what's happening in Syria is a separate thing. It is not. The so-called uprising in Syria has been engineered by the CIA since 2011, and in order to topple a regime, they call it a regime in Damascus, for the sake of Israel. This is something that many people do not get. Now that Aleppo has fallen, George, what is going to be next? This is the real question. In order for the Syrian army to push against these militants again in northern Hama, and they move on the highway to Aleppo, this will take months to probably even years, just like it was the case in 2012. So we returned basically to the point of 2012, and even worse now when it comes to Aleppo. And these multinational takfiris were unleashed first by Turkey, and second by the US in cooperation with the Israeli intelligence. And I would try to explain why this is a mutual interest between Turkey and Israel now in Aleppo. For Turkey, they see that Donald Trump is coming to the White House in the coming weeks, and Trump wants to withdraw the American occupation forces from Syria, and he wants to impose certain compromises in the region. So Erdogan rushed and unleashed these takfiris on Aleppo for him to have a better position when the time of negotiations come, and for when the time of the compromise comes. Now, during this time, the Israelis, when they reached to a so-called ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, they have sent demands to Syria. And the Jordanian foreign minister a few weeks ago, he was in Damascus and he delivered the American demands. Once the ceasefire agreement achieved, they were expecting from Damascus to close all the supply chains to Hezbollah and to strangle Hezbollah basically, and to try to degrade Hezbollah and completely annihilate it from the Lebanese society. And the Syrian government said no. So if you remember, the same night of the ceasefire agreement, Netanyahu gave a video speech and he said, I'm quoting him, Assad is playing with fire. And only a few hours later, around 6 hours later, all these multinational terrorists were unleashed from Idlib to Aleppo to conquer Aleppo, because Assad rejected the demand of the Israeli and the American side to strangle Hezbollah, which if Syria does that, Hezbollah is not only a strategic ally for Syria, it is also a major component of the axis of resistance and also a major supporter of the Palestinian cause. So even from an opportunistic point of view, if you see it beside the strategies and the politics, Syria has no interest at all to strangle its own ally in Lebanon. So now we have a situation that the Syrian army has to overstretch in the country again, and this could lead or pave the way for a possible Israeli incursion into the Syrian territories from the Golan Heights intersection, because they have been installing new spying technology, cameras, and also they send reinforcement to the Golan Heights. And surprise, surprise, yesterday, the so-called militants in the southern part of Syria, in the Horan area, where they joined the reconciliation process with the government, they said that they are going to attack Damascus now. So from all sides, they are trying to topple the government again and to finish this file all once and for all for the sake of Israel. But many people, George, and this is what really bothers me, for the people who support Palestine specifically, they don't see this strategic aspect of this conflict. And you mentioned it, there are many people fall for the sectarian lines, and also they have been psyoped by multiple media outlets and think tankers in the region and abroad into the belief that this is between a tyranny and a democracy. And to be honest with you, what's happening in Syria, you see anywhere and everywhere that these so-called rebels occupied, they have established something like not even a caliphate. We can't even call it a caliphate. They have imposed their Wahhabi ideology on everyone, and the rest of the components who do not agree with them, even among the Sunni people, they have been forced to leave because they cannot live among this type of people. Now these people are in charge of Aleppo, which has a big Christian also community and an Armenian community. And today we have eyewitnesses, and also I make daily calls to Aleppo, to my beloved ones, and they're telling me they started to impose the headscarf on the women in the streets, and they're destroying the alcohol shops. And ironically, they destroy the alcohol shops in Aleppo, but they don't destroy the alcohol shops in Turkey. If you realize that, those are the ones supported directly by Turkey, and they go to the free shop now and they destroy the alcohol, but they don't do the same in Turkey. It makes you wonder who is moving them on the chessboard.
Now, it didn't come as a surprise to you, perspicacious as you are, but it appears to have come as a surprise to the Syrian government and its armed forces and its allies. Otherwise, how could they so easily breach the defenses and so basically effortlessly take over the second most important city in Syria?
I have to be honest with your audience, George. There has been major failures in repelling this attack, and especially in building the fortifications and repelling these attacks. If I saw it coming from September, I'm sure that the government knew, and I'm sure that the Russian observation points also knew about this attack. They have intelligence, and they expected for the Syrian army to stand against this type of attack. However, once the attack started, there were multiple factors which led to the crumbling of the Syrian positions in western Aleppo. The first one was the sophisticated and well operated drone attacks. And those were supplied by the Ukrainian intelligence. So they had already the positions of the Syrian army and where their headquarters are, and there were massive drone attacks against the Syrian army positions. Secondly, they attacked also through the media outlets. Now, there are multiple media outlets that they have waged a massive fear-mongering and scare-mongering campaign and psyops against the Syrian army positions, and many places fell in the hands of the militants out of fear and not after a battlefield. There were many places that were evacuated out of fear and not due to fighting. So once the breach happened, and in the front line in the western suburbs of Aleppo, they managed to go to the city, something that the Syrian army thought it's better to retreat, regroup, and establish a new front line. And they wanted to establish a new front line in Ma'aret al-Nu'man, which is around 90 kilometers away from Aleppo, but they couldn't hold these positions because there was another attack this time on the intersection of Saraqib. So the Syrian army decided to go to northern Hama, and now from northern Hama they are planning on pushing against these militants, but this time they require a massive support, not only from the allies, but this time also from the Arabic countries, who said that they support, in exception for Qatar, every single Arabic country said that they support the Syrian army war against terrorism, because this time it's different from 2011 and 2012. This time the Turkish role is so direct and blatant that terrified the Arabic countries. If Turkey can occupy Syria, what makes you think they will not occupy Iraq through their proxies? And what makes you think they will not move to Saudi Arabia? And also, even if the Turks can't do that, the balance of power in the region will be massively shifted in favor of Turkey, something that Saudi Arabia and Iran hate to see. So we are seeing now unlikely like foes and rivals in the region like Saudi Arabia and Iran are finding themselves in the same trench in Syria. And Saudis and the Emiratis are going to give political cover to Syria and also possible financial support. And most importantly, they are going to turn a blind eye to the influx of fighters coming from Iraq, from Hezbollah, and probably also from Iran in order to repel this attack, something that was impossible to see in 2011. If you remember, all these Arabic countries kicked Syria out of the Arab League, imposed sanctions on Syria, cut diplomatic ties with Syria because of this particular issue. Now they will turn a blind eye and they will encourage the repelling of this attack, but this will take months and probably years. So, and the liberation of Aleppo, if it's possible militarily, it is going to be very devastating for the city, for the people, and many people will have to stay there because all the routes to leave and evacuate Aleppo are blocked. There is no highway, and the alternative route, which was called Khan Nasser, is also occupied now by these Nusra terrorists. Therefore, the civilians cannot leave any longer. They're stuck there, and unless Russia can impose certain humanitarian corridors on Turkey, the civilians will be stuck there and live in a Al-Qaeda enclave, basically, in Aleppo.
God preserve them. The situation of the Axis is stretched. It's clear. Perhaps it's also one of the reasons why this went so badly wrong this week. But Russia, for example, is stretched in not just Ukraine now, but a very clear regime change operation underway in Georgia on its borders. The Iranians are still mulling the timing and nature of their response to Israel. Irregulars from Iraq have arrived, although some say it's hundreds, some say it's thousands. From what you say, it's going to have to be tens of thousands if the people of Aleppo are to be rescued from this hell on earth of Takfiri fanatic rule. How realistic is it that Syria's allies can muster sufficient strength and numbers to liberate the land that has been lost?
So, you know what's the problem, George, with Russia and Iran and the rest of the players in the anti-American camp? Their problem is they're playing with the same rules that the Americans have set for them. And these rules are respected by the Russians and the Iranians, and the other side just sees it as an ink on paper and just time for them to rebuild, regroup, and come back at a later time. They see it just an opportunity for them, like the Minsk Agreement 1, Minsk Agreement 2, like the Iranian nuclear deal. And the same thing is with these de-escalation zones in Syria and letting all these terrorists thrive in Idlib. Those were, there was an agreement between Russia and Turkey completely hit this agreement now to the wall, and they attacked Aleppo. Why? Because the enemies of, or the rivals of Russia and Iran, they are bold and they're ready to violate the rules and the agreements that they have signed on, unlike the Iranians and the Russians who are playing with the same rules that the other side doesn't respect. So in this case, I see that this has been repeated over and over again in different geographies, like Ukraine, in Syria, now in Georgia, another coup attempt. In Armenia, similar attempts of color revolution happened and succeeded in 2018. So I think realistically speaking, the Russians can only participate in airstrikes against these militants and terrorists on the suburbs and the peripheries of Aleppo to try to cut the supply chains and hit the armored vehicles and heavy equipment of these terrorists. But the bigger part on the ground, they need boots on the ground. Because we have to understand that Syrian army is already overstretched and there is a threat of Israeli invasion now, and also the militants who are still active in the southern parts of Daraa, they're also ready to join the fight, and there are also ISIS pockets in the deserts. So unless the allies of Syria, from Iraq, from Lebanon, from also from Iran, send tens of thousands of soldiers to Syria, it is very, very difficult. I don't want to say impossible, but it's a very difficult task to restore all these large swaths of territories, especially that the militants are now inside the city. If you're going to kick them out of the city, George, there's going to be huge devastation in the city itself, and something that we don't want to see. And if you ask any regular Aleppo person now, which we call them on a daily basis, they don't want to live the same experiences of the past. They have had enough of war for 12, 13 years, and they're just fresh out of war, reconstructing and restoring their businesses. You know, everybody wants to have just a normal life. They don't want to go back to that era, the bleak era where there were bombings and fighting between all sides. This is the bitter reality on the ground. So the appetite for war is also different if we compare it from the past time to this one. This time the people are tired, so that's why the other side, the terrorists, managed to scare them and wage this psychological operation. And they've been live broadcasting it on social media platforms. Everybody were watching them coming with their usual shans and these Allahu Akbars, and people have in their subconscious and the recent memory that whenever they see these people, they remember beheadings, they remember slaughtering, they remember how they burned people alive, how they ate their organs. People might think that you were making some sensational statements, but those are real incidences that happened in Syria. So the people do not really want to experience a similar thing. So let's see what the Russians will do in this case, because Assad was in Moscow on Friday. Then the foreign minister of Iran came to Damascus and then went to Turkey. There is disagreement for sure between Iran and Turkey, because both sides say, yeah, we agree to fight terrorism. But what is the definition of terrorism? Turkey sees the Kurdish militias as terrorism, and the Iranians and the Syrians see these terrorists, basically the Al-Qaeda terrorists, as the real terrorists. So who is going to fight terrorism in Syria in this case, right?
Now, on the subject of psychological war, I mean, if the Al-Qaeda advance was militarily, speaking strictly, objectively impressive, the propaganda war was even more impressive. I know several big-ticket accounts, people who should know far better, who were repeating the lie that the president had fled to Moscow with his family, that there was a military coup underway in Damascus, that the terrorists had reached much farther than they actually have reached. In other words, the PSYOP was a very successful 48 hours. The British are behind this PSYOP, aren't they? They've been behind the disinformation effort on the Syrian front for more than a decade now.
The Brits funneled millions, tens of millions in psychological operations in Syria, including the white helmets, and also establishing radio stations, supporting the so-called activists and journalists who are now, they are fighting alongside these Al-Nusra Front militants. And the Britain, Netherlands, many other European countries sent them the satellite phones, they sent them the satellite internets, they sent them the computers, the sophisticated professional cameras, video cameras, all sorts of things, drones. So of course, when you watch their products, it looks like from a Hollywood movie, and that's not normal in the discourse. If you see the situation in Syria that is living under siege, sanctions, and the people do not have enough money for food, but these activists carry equipment with thousands of dollars in their hands, and they are working with these militants. Yes, and on that particular day, George, I participated in few X spaces, and these issues were discussed like it's a fact, like they were, and they even named names, who is carrying the coup, who is the leader of the head of the Syrian National Security Bureau. And like I participated, and I'm asking them, how can the head of the National Security Bureau lead a coup if he cannot move military units on the ground. He's not responsible for moving military units on the ground. If somebody can do it, probably the chief of staff of Syria, right? So they even give wrong names, but this doesn't matter at all. At that particular moment, Assad probably was assassinated 3 times, and he fled the country 2 times, and he fled to Moscow. I have so many reservations about the Syrian policy domestically and also foreign, but I'm certain of one thing. If they are going to topple the Syrian, as they call the Syrian regime, Assad will not flee the country. You will see him like Gaddafi fighting till the end. And you will, when the ISIS was 5 kilometers away from his office, he was in his office and he could have been killed at any moment. And until this moment. And I think that's the only certainty that I have. If they are going to push to Damascus, they're not going to see Assad fleeing the country to other places. I mean, he didn't even send his children out of the country during the war. So he will not go out as well. All these psychological operations, George, are very effective, but it stays on the internet, but at the same time, the people following it inside Syria, as I mentioned, there were some places in Aleppo which fell because they had sleeping cells in the neighborhood who come to the streets. They just take few videos and start shouting Allahu Akbar in the streets, and people were all going back to their homes. So they scared the people, and they scared the young soldiers in the Syrian army, because this area, specifically in western Aleppo, the units who were protecting this area, they were mostly conscripts. They were new soldiers. They didn't have enough experience. And this was one of the mistakes, of course, that I already addressed in this case. And the worst case scenario happened, George. I feel like it's a nightmare for me, for many, many other Syrians. And we're just like, as if we just started the regime change war again. Like we're living again in 2011, and we're in 2024. We thought it's behind us. We were wrong. And now we have probably another 10 years of conflict in Syria.
God save Syria, and God preserve your powerful voice, Kevork. Thanks for joining us on Have It Out with Galloway. A somber resume of the situation in Syria. Let's go to New York, where Professor Johanna Sofia Paukipsi is there. Professor, what would you like to say?
I would love to contextualize all these happenings. I don't know as much about the detail as my previous speaker, but I know, as you did when I moved to Zimbabwe in 1981 and married my first husband, Zimbabwean Albert Chimedza, I learned how the world is actually run. And what I wanted to say today to contextualize is that, of course, we come from empires to feudalism to monotheistic religions to capitalism, and the super billionaires are running the show and profit from conflict, all conflicts. And what can we do to change the system when we know that both sides are always funded by those in that superpower who profit?
Well, I'm always skeptical about the argument about who profits from war. Of course, there are people who profit mightily from war. Bob Dylan wrote about the masters of war more than half a century ago. And of course, the military-industrial complex is a significant factor in every big geostrategic decision that is made. But it isn't all down to money. It's about power and ideology. There is a major challenge going on against the Western Empire, which is existential in nature. If the new world is born, the old world will not be able to coexist with it in the way that it has ruled the roost for 500 years of human history. That's how long the Anglo-American, the Northern European, the Western European, the white part of humanity has been ruling the roost. So the rise of the East the rise of Eurasia, the rise of these new powers like Iran is an existential threat to the domination of the empire. It's not just about making money from the sale of weapons and the sale of rockets and airplanes and so on, though of course it would be foolish to disregard that. It's a political challenge that they are seeking to repel. And we have to face certain facts. Russia, China, Iran, Hezbollah, they are not all powerful. They cannot guarantee the outcomes. As Che Guevara said, revolution is not an apple that falls from the tree. You have to shake the tree, and you have to be strong enough to shake the tree whilst fending off those who own the orchard. And the outcome is not guaranteed. Far too many people who oppose Western empire imagine that the outcome is guaranteed. Imagine that history is ineluctably marching in the direction that we want it to march, and that the enemy is doomed. It's not. We run the risk of overestimating ourselves and underestimating those against whom we stand. This is going to be a tough fight. You just heard Kevork, a man from Aleppo, saying it might be 10 years before the hapless people of that wonderful ancient city are liberated from the lowest of the low, lowest of the low. If you've ever seen these people eating other people's hearts, cutting off other people's heads, children's heads. They gave a statement yesterday that they were headed to Karbala in Iraq to drag the Shiites through the streets. And then they were headed for Gaza, where they were going to do the same to the Palestinian resistance, Hamas. They takfired Hamas. They expelled Hamas from the religion. That's the kind of people we're talking about here. And all of you have got to make a decision. Which side are you on in that contest? Thank you, Professor. Fra Hughes, my old friend.
Thank you for having me. I love your show. I love your work.
Lovely. Thank you, Professor. Fra Hughes in Belfast, good old friend of mine and of the show. Fra, what's your point of view?
Thank you very much, George. I have to say I love the show as well. So I'm a good company with the professor there. I must say Kevork's analysis there was 100%, and it's very good and very important to hear a genuine, honest appraisal sometimes of what's happening on the ground, because a lot of other times you hear not necessarily propaganda, but people want to talk up the resistance, they want to talk up the victories, and they want to inspire and show solidarity with the people fighting the Zionist regime. I just wanted to pull a few things together from the conversation so far. One of the parallels that I was really going to try and work on here is Biden's legacy. I mean, Biden was the man who, along with Victoria Nuland, was responsible for the coup in Ukraine and Kiev. He's also responsible for some of the destruction in Syria in 2014. And also in 2014, there was an Israeli war again on Gaza. So part of the thing that I'd like to extrapolate is that people talk about governments having like a 5-year mandate. You know, the run for office, they get elected, they have a mandate, but they're planning after 5 years, maximum 10 years that they're going to go. But the deep state will be there forever, and it seems to be the policy of the deep state to continue these wars of aggression, to destabilize sovereign nations, to have the regime change, color revolutions, planned decades in advance. I mean, since 1979, they've been looking to destabilize and destroy and have a regime change in Iran. And we're talking about the slick propaganda that is coming through the likes of the white helmets and the media groups. I've been watching some stuff, not intentionally, it's just appeared on my timeline on Facebook of what's happening in Georgia and in Tbilisi. And that's very, 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 very professional. And it's quite frightening to see tens of thousands of would-be fascists, the same that we had in Kiev, marching through the streets of Georgia. So do you think that people will be able to withstand another color regime change in Georgia, or are we witnessing Maidan Square Mark II?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, as they used to say. Excellent contribution. Thank you, Fra. I think that the Georgian people will withstand this Western regime change operation. I don't think that Russia can afford another Ukraine on its other border. And I think that it's going to be a tough fight, but I believe that the forces who want to resist the empire will prevail there. But it's going to be a struggle, and the more struggles there are, the more the resistance, the axis of resistance, in which I include Russia and China, are spread. And these provocations are for that reason, in part. The truth is that the Biden administration is going out with a bang. If Donald Trump intends to be a president that solves wars, stops wars, well, Biden's making sure that he's got far more fires to fight than he did just a month ago. These efforts are being made to compromise and prejudice the first year of Donald Trump's presidency. And the deep state that you identified is definitely involved in that. Let's go to Bath in England. Dr. Matthew Alford. Doctor, welcome back. What would you like to say?
I would like to say, when I've been going to Gaza rallies, anti-war rallies over the past few months, I think we've all agreed that that no one wants a war in Syria, and no one wants a war in Gaza, obviously. But a lot of people who I met there were much more skeptical about President Assad and what his role has been over the years. I've always thought that this arming of Al-Qaeda style, ISIS style terrorists in Syria seemed like an absolutely atrocious idea. But people at the anti-war marches that I've been to have been saying that, who are from the region, have said that they consider Assad to be almost like the Stalin of the Middle East. Like, that's the level of kind of hatred that they have for him, and the kind of level of scale of his villainy throughout the Middle East. Do you have any idea, George, of how to compare Assad with the other dictators of the 21st and 20th and 21st centuries? Where does he fit in the pantheon?
Doctor, first of all, if it wasn't for Stalin, you'd be speaking to me in German. And I'd be replying in German, except I would have perished in a concentration camp, and almost certainly you would have. So if that's the kind of discourse, I think you need to find better companions on these anti-war marches. There's been a massive propaganda job done on Assad and on Syria. And if people can't see through that, then, God help us. I've got almost no words for them. They did the same with Saddam Hussein. It's not necessary to support Saddam Hussein to oppose a British and American invasion of Iraq. So why should it be necessary to like Bashar al-Assad, to oppose an American and a British invasion, because that's what it is, of Syria? I mean, what's the mentality of these kinds of people? We are against the empire of Anglo-Saxons invading, occupying, regime-changing countries around the world that don't bow the knee to them. That's obvious. I mean, who needs a class on that? Who needs to read a book on that? It's obvious that the people behind this uprising are the worst people in the world, that if you're on an anti-war march, if you're on a pro-Gaza march, you really should be able to understand that. Now, I blame the quality of the leadership of the anti-war movement for this kind of persistent, consistent error of judgment. They're so keen to say, well, we're against NATO in Ukraine, but we don't like Russia. We don't like Putin. We're against the attacks on Iran, but we don't like the Iranian government. We don't like Iran's point of view on this or that. This is the precise opposite of the prism through which we should be viewing this. Do you want the United States and the United Kingdom to rule the world in perpetuity? Do you want the Western Empire to crush all opposition to it? If not, stand up, and stand up for the people who are under attack from that empire. Dennis Ballantyne is in New York. Let's go back to New York. Dennis.
Russia unveiled a new missile technology they called Orishnik, translation hazelnut in English, several weeks ago in the Ukraine. And by all indications that I have seen so far, this technology, when history is written, it will be said that this technology ushered in the post-nuclear age. We have all been under the threat of nuclear annihilation since the dawn of the nuclear age, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. There are aerospace engineers, military experts, Scott Ritter, Colonel McGregor, and most importantly among them all, Andrei Martyanov, who argue that this technology is now the turning point, which will eventually change the nature of warfare.
Let's hope so, Dennis. Let's hope so. But it hasn't deterred the NATO invasion of Russia through Ukraine yet. It hasn't stopped them trying to repeat Ukraine in Georgia. It hasn't stopped them moving their hordes of throat cutters into Syria. Maybe we need some hazelnuts more widely available. Maybe Israeli planes have got to be shot down out of the sky in Syria. Maybe the government of Syria has got to be sufficiently empowered that it can liberate the territories, not just that were seized this week, but the territories that were already lost. Why are the Americans allowed to continue to occupy the oil-producing areas of Syria? Why is Idlib still a festering nest of Al-Qaeda and ISIS? Why have they not been able to liberate them? It's for the reason that Kevork said. I close with the words of the French revolutionary Saint-Just, who said, "He who half makes a revolution is digging their own grave." It's time for all of the technology, all of the strength of all of the countries of the axis of resistance to toughen up, sharpen up their game, step up to the plate. Because if these people win in Syria, if these people win in Georgia, you think they're going to stop there? This is an existential battle, a battle to the end for the future of humanity. And for those who gaily announced their membership of BRICS at the Kazan conference, which I attended just a few weeks ago, but who were already planning to do the dirty work of the empire when they returned home. You think Erdogan didn't know that this was going to happen when he was sitting with Putin, when he was sitting with the leaders of Iran and China? You think he didn't know he was about to stab in the back the new world that is struggling to be born? Of course he knew. He planned it all along. The BRICS can't just be a concert party, can't just be a Christmas club. It has to be the new world. Well, I've run out of time. My apologies to those who did not get on the show. Come back next week at the same time, same place. I promise we'll bump you up the call list so that you have a chance to be heard. Thanks for watching. Have it out with Galloway.